Is this an international health hazard or a military concern?
Both.
Are these things alive or dead?
We don't know.
When there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Dawn of the Dead, rated R.
Is everyone dead?
Dead-ish.
Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2004 horror remake, Dawn of the Dead. Now, this is a remake of the iconic horror film of the same name, which was directed by George Romero. Now, that film is considered to be a watershed moment in horror, and to this day is still considered to be one of the finest zombie films ever made. So this film, just by it existing, was starting off on the wrong foot for a lot of horror fans. And despite the fact that it is a remake of an iconic, beloved horror film, it doesn't fall into the same traps that a lot of other remakes from this time period did. It doesn't try to copy or directly recreate what the first or iconic version of this story did. Instead, it takes a page from David Cronenberg's The Fly, or John Carpenter's The Thing, or Chuck Russell's The Blob, and really does make a conscious attempt to stand on its own 2 feet. And as a result, despite its flaws, despite the moments where it misfires, it's still a pretty satisfying experience, because of the fact that it did not bother and it did not try to one-up the original, which is always a mistake, and at the same time, it didn't try to just be the original. Instead of being more of a atmospheric horror film with a lot of social commentary, this version of Dawn of the Dead decided to be more of an action horror film, and that definitely did help it in the long run. Now, it's directed by Zack Snyder, and this was his first foray into directing a feature film. And you would not know it, because he really did deliver on so many fronts here with his direction. This film has some really spectacular looking shots in it, some very ambitious camera work, specifically in the opening sequences and like the first 10 minutes, the use of POVs, the use of wide shots, the use of the camera in different locations, far up high in the sky and then down below. Just a really impressive tour de force of filmmaking techniques. And Snyder's direction really did work so well when it comes to the film's numerous action sequences. He really put a spotlight on the film's crowd-pleasing, big, grand moments. Scenes where zombies are on fire, getting shot in the face, and a lot of the film's big, gory scenes were definitely enhanced by Snyder's direction. And the sequences that are just trying to establish the setting of the mall were also well shot by Snyder. And I really feel that Snyder really did benefit from the fact that, unlike now where he's an established and already well-known talent, he couldn't rest on his laurels here. He had to take more risks. He had to go all out there. And he also had to restrain himself a little more, which is really something that I think he should do more of today, specifically when it comes to slow motion, because nowadays he just overdoses on slow-mo, and you have scenes like somebody dropping a cheeseburger on the cab of a truck in slow-mo. Like, it's just too much to the point where it's laughable. Here, there are some moments where it's a little too much, like some scenes where Ving Rhames is ejecting some shotgun shells in slow-mo. Not necessary, not needed. Other sequences, like this old lady smoking a cigarette who drops it on the floor and then puts it out with her foot, that did not need to be in slow motion at all. Completely unnecessary. But other than those few instances, for the most part, he's more restrained here with his directing. He doesn't overdo it with slow motion. And I think that makes it one of his better films when it comes to his directing. And I just feel that Zack, despite his relative inexperience, handled everything like a pro. Worked well with his cast, worked well with the crew. It was a pretty big, ambitious film considering that it's a remake of Dawn of the Dead, and he handled that pressure brilliantly. So overall, I don't really have much complaints when it comes to Snyder's direction here. I thought that he did a great job. Now, the screenplay, on the other hand, by James Gunn, that's where things kind of don't really click for me, at least not fully. So James Gunn, he's listed as the main screenwriter here, but there were other writers who were uncredited. But James Gunn's script, I don't think it develops characters that well. You have a lot of characters in this film, and some just randomly pop up, and they, for some reason, are considered main and integral characters for the rest of the movie, even though they just show up and there's next to nothing in terms of real depth to them. And then you have other characters where they are up front and center, but they still feel pretty bland and pretty empty because there's really not a lot of development. And I understand why the film did that, because it wants to be a breakneck, manic film in terms of its pacing. So if it stopped a little more to build characters, that would hurt the pacing. But I think that if it took a little more time fleshing out some more of these characters, I think it would actually benefit the film in the long run. Because you have so many characters, and as a result, there's a lot of characters I don't give a fuck about. I don't care whether or not they get eaten by zombies, and that hurts the pacing. It doesn't actually help the film maintain the breakneck pacing that they're trying to go for. And the director's cut doesn't really solve those issues either. There's a little bit more, but not much, and it actually creates other issues. For instance, now Ava and Michael are like a couple, and it doesn't work at all because those two never really developed enough chemistry, at least romantic chemistry, for that to actually play out well enough. So it just comes across as random and cliched, and it doesn't really add much to the film, and it's just an issue with the overall characterization because of the fact that, oh, now here's another thing that doesn't work. And then you have subplots that are just honestly pretty poor. For instance, there's a subplot with Mekhi Phifer's character and his wife. So you have Mekhi Phifer's character Andre and his wife Luda, played by Ina Korobinka, and out of the blue, he's now obsessed with the idea of having a family to the point where he's willing to tie up his pregnant zombie girlfriend and put a bridle in her mouth so she doesn't bite him, so she can give birth to the baby, which you know at this point is already a zombie as well, because that's how things work. But he's so obsessed with the idea of having a family at this point that he doesn't care or doesn't want to believe that, and he's delusional. And then he's also so obsessed to the point where he's violent and overprotective. So when somebody comes in and puts his dead zombie wife out of her misery and shoots her in the head, he acts all defensive and then fires back at her, and he dies because she gets shot. I mean, she shoots him, the older gal who shot his wife. And it's one of those things you're like, what even is this? This is stupid. This is dumb. This doesn't really make much sense. Why is he this obsessed? It would make more sense and it would work decently enough if you had a middle point where you see that obsession build, but that never happens. So that subplot sucks. I don't like that subplot at all. There's another little sequence that doesn't work for me that involves, I think her name is Nicole. She's gotten really infatuated and really connected and to this dog, and because of the fact that she's really attached to this dog, she steals the truck and goes over to the weapons place, the armory across the street, and puts herself at risk and puts the guy who's been up there sniping zombies on the roof, puts him at risk. And I know why that scene is there, so that the zombies would have a way for them to get inside the building, but it just feels like another unnecessary addition, because you could just have the zombies figure a way out anyway. I mean, the zombies get in there after the dog is let in. So you don't even need to have her go over there. There's no reason for her to go over there, because it's not like the main characters need a reason to go across the street so they can save her. They are going to go across the street anyway to get weapons and to get more ammo. So that whole bit was completely unnecessary and not needed. And then you have stuff like the end credits, which honestly makes it seem as if everyone fucking died and got eaten by zombies on the island. So what the fuck was the point of all of this that we just saw, of them going through all this trouble of taking buses and putting bulldozer, I don't think, they're not really bulldozers. It's like a scoop. So they took like a scoop and put it on the front of the bus and put barbed wire around it so they could drive through the massive zombies, so they could get the fuck out of there, so they could find a way to get to the boat. And they got to the boat, but it doesn't fucking matter, because the camcorder footage is basically insinuating that the zombies fucking killed them. So I definitely don't like that. I hate that shit. It's awful. The film is bleak enough as it is. We do not need an ending where everybody fucking dies and gets eaten by zombies. And there are also some moments where the humor doesn't really jive that well with the tone. Some of the attempts at being humorous are just not really that funny. There are characters like Ty Burrell's character. Why the fuck is he here? I guess he's trying to be comic relief, but he's not really that funny. He's just a snooty asshole. And do we really need another snooty asshole character when we already kind of had that going on with CJ? Maybe it's because CJ is now starting to turn a new leaf, so we need someone to replace him as the antagonist. But it doesn't really go anywhere, because, oh, he's self-serving and wants to do everything he can to protect himself and his own ass, but then he still gets killed by a zombie because he's a dumbass. So what is even really the point of him being the new antagonist? And speaking of these characters, I mean, other than Ving Rhames, which, to be honest, there isn't a lot of depth with this character other than he has a brother and he wants to go to this certain camp to try to get to his brother, but then he finds out that the camp is gone. So then he decides to still hang out with the rest of the survivors at the mall and help them survive. There's not a lot of character development with him, but Ving Rhames makes that character the best character in the movie because of his charisma and his personality, and because he's a badass. Sarah Polley, you definitely do sympathize with her because the opening sequence, the trauma that she has to deal with when it comes to seeing her daughter all zombified and then having to run away from her husband who's now turned, is honestly really harrowing stuff. So you definitely do sympathize with her. And I think for the most part, when it comes to the script, she's probably the strongest character. Michael, who's a Best Buy clerk, he decides to be a leader and take the lead and try to move things along more smoothly. And he's all right, but I never bought him in any kind of scenario where he was meant to be cool or badass. I didn't buy it. It's like imagining Owen Wilson in a serious role being a badass. It doesn't really connect. Mekhi Phifer, he was a criminal, but he really wanted to have a family, and I liked Mekhi Phifer and his performance here. He had some fun little bits of banter, but his character is a dumbass. The whole thing with him and his wife, like I mentioned, it doesn't fucking work. Michael Kelly, who plays CJ, I like the fact that the character starts out as some unlikable prick, but then as the film goes on, he becomes more endearing, and ultimately he becomes one of the best characters. Kevin Zegers, he plays Terry, who's like one of the young security guards, and he's one of the only ones that survives. I think he's one of the last survivors. You have Matt Frewer, who plays Frank, who's Nicole's father, and that whole bit was really good. I thought that was a really well written sequence where Matt Frewer's character, he was he was a member of the group that the truck driver gal brought in to the mall, and he was bitten. So now he's slowly turning, and I really felt that the way that that scene was handled was very tragic and honestly pretty powerful. And I thought Matt Frewer was fantastic in that bit role. And yeah, speaking of the truck driver, that's Norma. But like when Norma comes in, she brings in like all these other characters, and they just feel like they're just there. For example, Tucker, like he just has a bad leg. Okay, whatever. Glenn, who's a church organist, the main thing with him is that he's gay. That's about it. Uh, Monica, who's really promiscuous and so on, like she's just down to fuck. Um, and there's just a few other characters that just really not much of anything. Like, who really cares about these characters? They're just zombie fodder. That's really all they are. Which just makes you think, why do we have so many characters? We don't need that many characters. If you cut the characters down, then you would have more time for the film to slow down a little bit and for you to get to know even more about them. So then they connect with the audience more. But you know, they decided to go a different route, and as a result, there's just a lot of characters that are just zombie fodder and don't really add that much to the film. And that's why one of the weakest aspects of the script is the characters. And there are other things too that are kind of uh, misfires, but for the most part, though, when it comes to the film's set pieces, when it comes to the action, when it comes to the gore, it's pretty consistent in terms of its quality. It's honestly quite good when it comes to those moments. The opening sequence, I really love the opening credits with The Man Comes Around by Johnny Cash, which apparently was Zack Snyder's idea. And what also was Zack Snyder's idea is the lounge singer cover of Down with the Sickness, which was done by Richard, I think, Cheese. So that was apparently a Zack Snyder move as well. And I got to give Zack a lot of credit for that. That was a fun idea to have during a montage sequence. And it was a definite highlight of the film because with that music during that montage, it made that montage, which was already humorous, even funnier and even more memorable. And there are some other things I guess I could mention that I wasn't really that big on. For instance, this whole thing with this one of the survivors from the truck um, that were brought in by Norma. She's clearly too far gone. She even looks like she's already completely turned. And for some reason, the film waits for her to turn until she gets killed. I think the reason why they did that is to showcase the rules to our characters of when and how fast people turn. But it just came across stilted and just didn't really work that well. But and then the whole stuff with the zombie baby, just they did nothing with the zombie baby. If I want to see a zombie baby done well and actually see them do something with it, I'll watch Dead Alive, Peter Jackson's Dead Alive, because the zombie baby here, it gets born, you see a couple shots of it, and then it gets shot off screen. Whatever. One thing I did want to mention about the script as well that I liked is how they handled the character of, I think his name is, yeah, Andy, who's played by Bruce Bone. I like that character, and I like the fact that he communicated with just whiteboards, and it was a nice change of pace in terms of the kind of characters that you had with this cast, and you definitely felt for the guy because can you imagine being in that scenario? You're just trapped on the top of this roof of a building while there's zombies everywhere, and you're just slowly dying of dehydration and starvation, and you have no contact with anyone other than these people who are in the mall. And that had to just royally suck. Just absolutely 100% suck all kinds of ass to be in that kind of situation. And speaking of characters, might as well talk about the cast. Sarah Polley as Ava, I think her name is Anna actually. Anna is her name. My bad. Um, Pretty good. I wouldn't say she was fantastic or amazing. She didn't really leave a lasting impression on me, but I think that honestly is more due to the script than really her acting. Uh, Definitely did a solid job as what is essentially the lead of the film. Ving Rhames, he was a badass. He stole the film. It's totally understandable why so many people, when they think of this movie, they think of Ving Rhames' character Kenneth, because he was awesome. He was really captivating because of just how committed Ving Rhames was to this character. Jake Weber, he was okay. I didn't think he was that impressive. I just thought he was a little bland. But he wasn't terrible by any means. He was just there for me. Mekhi Phifer, for what he was asked to do early on, had some fun moments, but then when he's supposed to be some obsessed family man, it just fell apart. Burrell played a great snooty prick. He does that role to perfection. Michael Kelly as CJ. Honestly, the other actor that I was the most impressed with was him because of the different levels that he brought to this character. Because you have one level where he's a total fucking asshole, and then you have another level where you actually start to like the guy, and you really do root for him, and you view him as a very key member of this group of survivors. The rest of the cast, though, completely forgettable to me other than Matt Frewer, and the reason for that is really the lack of character development. There's no reason for me to really get that invested in Kevin Zegers' character Terry, or Michael Berry's Bart, or Lindy Booth's Nicole, or Luda, or Glenn, or Monica, or Norma. I don't really care. So, yeah. But for the most part, decent enough cast. Definitely doesn't hold up to the cast of the original, but still a decent enough cast in its own right. Speaking of the original, you do have some really fun cameos by Tom Savini, as well as one of the other actors from Dawn of the Dead. I don't know why his name is not coming to me. I'm gonna look it up real quick because I want to make sure I don't fuck it up. Ken Foree. So you have Ken Foree, who has a little cameo. It was a fun cameo. So yeah, so you do have some fun little Easter eggs for fans of the original. You had one moment where you had Galen Ross. Her name is actually there as the name of a department store in the mall. So I thought that was kind of fun. So decent enough cast. When it comes to some of the other elements of the film, the music by Tyler Bates is, I would say it's not one of Tyler Bates's best scores, but it's still pretty good. It's a pretty good score. It definitely does add an extra bit of adrenaline to a lot of the sequences where the zombies are just running at the camera and just seemingly an endless stream of just gnashing teeth. And overall, pretty solid score. Nothing spectacular, but solid. The cinematography by Matthew F. Leonetti. This is one other problem I have with the movie. I hate the way certain scenes are shot. And this is an issue that a lot of films from this time period in the mid to late 2000s dealt with. Cinematography where everything is contrast boosted to 1,000,000 degrees. So, for instance, when you have sequences that are shot outside, the greens are just way too bright, way too washed out. The whites are awful. The whites are a fucking eyesore. And there's a lot of other shots in the film that suffer from this, where things just look like the contrast was turned up to 11, and I don't like that look. It doesn't add anything to the movie. It just makes things look washed out, and it actually makes the movie less impressive from a visual standpoint to me. That being said, it is also well edited by Niven Howie. Niven Howie did a good job editing the film, especially the sequences that deal with the zombies attacking and action sequences like shotgun blasting and explosions and so on. Speaking of zombies running, I never really had an issue with zombies running. I know there are a lot of diehard fans who think that's one of the worst things about this. I think it's fine because it helps the film stand out. If it's just another shambling zombie movie, then it would just be even more compared to the first film. And it would also pale in comparison even more. So I'm glad that they didn't do that, and it was more of a different take. That being said, there are some moments with the zombies running where it's laughable, and it's because the camera is cranked up, and sometimes that approach works and it adds to a scene, but in this instance, especially near the end of the film, it hurts those scenes so much. It makes everything look like a Benny Hill routine. So when you have the zombies running at the camera, it's already a crazy, chaotic series of events with the survivors trying to survive against these hordes of zombies, and they just keep running at them nonstop. You don't need to have the camera sped up. You don't need to add that extra bit because it does nothing. It doesn't really help things. It's an artificial boost that, like I said, it just makes things look ridiculous. So you see zombies going, "Oh," and then you're expecting, see, and that's not what you want out of your climactic sequence featuring your survivors fighting a zombie horde while they're trying to escape and find some sense of security and safety. You don't want to be reminded of Benny Hill. So that's something that I definitely didn't care for either, is the moments where they crank the camera up when the zombies are running. But thankfully, that isn't something that's prevalent a lot in the film, but when it's there, it's really obvious. The zombie makeup for the lower budget of 26 million, it's pretty good. It's definitely a bloody film. The opening sequence alone is definitely an example of some serious blood flowing. Um, and there are some other moments, like there's a headshot that's pretty awesome. There's a scene where a guy takes a croquet mallet and shoves it through a zombie's head. So there are a decent amount of sequences that are definitely going to please any gore hounds out there. And it's all done practically for the most part. There really isn't much CGI at all. So that's always something that's a nice sight to see when it comes to a horror film or a zombie movie. Apparently, the budget was originally higher, but then it was slashed in half prior to them starting production because of the fact that House of the Dead bombed. House of the Dead was a dumb idea. I mean, an adaptation of the game isn't really a bad idea, but the way that they handled it was stupid from the beginning. So I don't know why they thought it was going to be a big hit, and it wasn't. So I don't think that the reason for that bombing was because they spent, I mean, well, yeah, it would be. I mean, if you spent too much money on it and it bombed, then that is a reason for why it bombed. You should have spent less money. But I don't think that should have been the reason why the studio slashed the budget, because of this idea that people don't want zombie movies, or audiences were not really excited for zombie movies anymore. They weren't excited for that shitty zombie movie. So I honestly would have loved to have seen what Zack Snyder and company could have done with more money. Because with more money, you probably could have had even more crazy gore, even more insane bits of bloody action and carnage. But because of the fact that the budget was limited, they weren't really able to go balls out with it. But they still went pretty far. They used that budget really well and got the most out of it, for sure. And for a film that's around 100 minutes, and that's the theatrical cut, the director's cut is actually 110. It's paced fairly well. I will say the theatrical cut is better paced, but it does have a little bit more blood and violence. But it also has some extra scenes that don't really do much for the film and kind of hurt some of the sequences. So it's one of those things where I'm not going to actually say the director's cut is massively superior to the theatrical version. In fact, I would probably say I prefer the theatrical version, even though it's not as bloody or as violent. The extra blood and violence and gore is not so significant that it's a drastic difference. So the tighter pacing and the more effective sequences that aren't as effective for some reason in the director's cut, honestly, to me, make the theatrical version the one that I prefer the most. But at the end of the day, Dawn of the Dead is one of those films that I do agree with Ebert and Roper. I think it's the perfect way to sum it up. It's bloody good fun. It really is. It's not one of my personal favorites. It's not a film I would watch over and over again, but it's still a bloody good fun zombie movie. And it's one of those films that could have been a fucking disaster. It could have been an embarrassment, and it wasn't. And that's something that I definitely appreciate about it because, like I said, during this time, you had so many remakes or reboots that missed the entire point of what made the original a classic and just completely took a giant steaming dump on the original films by them existing, like The Fog, uh, The Hitcher, and so on. Thankfully, Dawn of the Dead is not one of those movies because there was passion and there was care and there was a lot of thought put into this remake. It wasn't something that was just made solely as a cash grab like a lot of those other remakes at the time were. But anyway, that's my review of Dawn of the Dead, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.